Can humans be gods? Is human nature benevolent enough to be creators? Are humans responsible enough to grant life to their creations and take care of them? If not, what happens? Mary Shelley, the author of the Gothic novel Frankenstein, poses such questions in her book for her readers to find answers. Hi, we're Paul and Eugene, and we've been studying Shelley's Frankenstein.
We will be exploring the prominent ideas of identity and creative responsibility represented throughout Frankenstein. Mary Shelley's life was characterized by a lot of tragedy, which to survive through, she had to have a lot of resilience and a sharp mind that challenged social norms of her era. Born in London on August 30th, 1797, she was always around intellectuals. Her mother was a renowned feminist, Mary Wollstonecraft, and her father was the philosopher William Godwin. Yet her name stood the test of time, primarily due to her 1818 masterpiece, Frankenstein, a novel that remains relevant 2 centuries later. Shelley's life was marked by many challenges, including the death of her 3 children and the drowning of her husband, Percy Shelley. Yet she continued to write and publish her works until she died in 1851 at age 53 from a brain tumor.
The novel mostly revolves around the protagonist Victor's narrative, as he tells about his journey to an ambitious young man named Robert Walton. From his childhood, Victor was intrigued by the notion of natural philosophy and was particularly fascinated by the boundary between life and death. As he enters adulthood, he decides to pursue an experiment he has been waiting for his whole life, creating a new life. After numerous months in the pursuit of his dream, he creates a new species, which he initially perceives as beautiful but later develops a feeling of detachment and disgust towards. Ultimately, he abandons his creature. While recovering from the horrors of his distorted creation, the monster, now with intelligence and a shattered heart from countless abuses, seeks to avenge Frankenstein for his negligence. The story delves into the inner and outer conflicts between these 2 characters and their subsequent tragedies.
So the first major theme that we'll be talking about is the theme of identity and also the theme of human nature. But firstly, what is identity? Identity is a set of behavioral or personal characteristics by which an individual is recognizable or known. So basically, what makes you you? So the creature struggles to find its identity, and this is a reaction to the way it's been treated, meaning its conflicted identity is the consequential product of the countless abuses and negligences it has received. On page 148, he says, "I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind?" The creature's identity, or lack thereof, is a struggle with himself that plays off of his struggle with loneliness. The creature yearns for companionship, which he fails to receive from humanity, so he turns to his last resort, his creator, to find him a wife. On page 148, he says, "I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed as myself would not deny herself to me." Basically, the creature struggles to find himself, and it's leading him to literally the last person he can think of, because everyone else has shunned him, and that's made him miserable and wretched and do evil things. And in Bernachese's monstrosity, suffering, subjectivity, and the sympathetic community in Frankenstein, and the structure of torture, Bernachese relays, according to David Marshall, physical and psychological suffering and annihilation exist in a continuum. Denying individuals the refuge of community can be destructive to their sense of self. If you want to go read that, that is Bernachese's article on page 205. The article explains that the conflicted identity of the monster is the result of the mental and physical hardships the monster has gone through. Since birth, it has been treated with disgust and abhorrence, meaning that it was exposed to such maltreatment without any barrier that it has invoked on itself self-pity, self-denial, self-hatred, and ultimately has a fractured identity of itself. The second theme is human nature, and that will be seen through Victor himself and the Felix family. So the Felix family is gentle and kind to other humans, but they reject someone who looks different from them. And this shows the flawed nature of humans, because even the most quoted to be amiable and lovely humans on 132, described by the monster himself, rejected the monster himself. On 138, he laments, There is none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me. These characters demonstrate how humanity is capable of both great good and great evil at the same time. Frankenstein displays the duality of man through the rejection of the unfamiliar, because it is not what we find easy to love that makes us good people, but that which is fundamentally abhorrent to us. In monstrosity, suffering, subjectivity, and the sympathetic community of Frankenstein in the structure of torture, Burgess argues through Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments that the greatest hindrance to being a good person is any withdrawal of sympathy by the human community. This is seen through the monster because we are by nature social creatures, and the withdrawal of such fundamental aspects of our being can lead us into dark places. It can even numb our conscience, which Victor Frankenstein experiences through his voluntary isolation during and after the creation of the creature. Because of this, Frankenstein concludes that he is guiltless of the crimes of the monster, despite his paternal negligence, which is the catalyst for the atrocities the monster has created. He says on page 168, "I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of a crime." This demonstrates Victor's hypocrisy and how he avoids taking responsibility for the results of his actions, even though he knows his fate is forever tied to the monster. And just a side note, when Mary Shelley draws on many biblical themes in this novel, it's including Luke 23:24, when Jesus was on the cross and he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what to do." Relating this to Frankenstein and the human nature, an aspect of the human condition is how we don't take moments to understand the potential implications of our actions. But anyways, back to the main lesson. But if Frankenstein is not to blame for the various deaths that occur, who is? Had he endowed his reaction, as God endowed Adam's in Milton's epic, with free will? Or is a demon psychologically his creature, committing to the forbidden acts which Frankenstein once committed, so long as Frankenstein himself remains guiltless? And that is Owait's quote on page 547 of his article. And basically it speaks to the duality of man, because it's also seen through fire, which is a major symbol in Frankenstein. So in Frankenstein Parable Spectacle, David Seed discusses the significance of fire in his story. Frankenstein's interest in fire is metaphysical. The monster sees it first as a social means which he collects wood from the Delacies. Then when that hope is burned, he burns down their cottage in ritual of despair. See page 6. The monster himself expresses this through his first encounter with fire in the mountains. On page 101 he says, "How strange that something should cause such opposite effects." The fire both produces a response of delight and warmth, and a cry of pain on 101. This description of the nature of fire is intended to provide the reader with an understanding of what is to come as the monster ventures through and attempts to interact with humans, who share the parallel nature to the fire. Mary Shelley's masterpiece ultimately comes down to this, that knowledge can be used for both good and evil. Seed backs this by saying power is an ambiguous force which rebounds on the would-be creator to destroy him. In Frankenstein, the mind has the power to create both life and death.
Another crucial topic that needs to be discussed in Frankenstein is creative responsibility. Creative responsibility means those who create are obliged to thoroughly think about their intention and their creation's impact on the world. The novel invokes a question among readers. Why did Frankenstein abandon his creation? It is not only because of the monster's gross tech appearance, but he fails to bring creative responsibility to consideration, meaning he realizes the absence of the process of assessing creative responsibility immediately after completing his creature. Thus, he feels disconnected to everything he built up so far, and he abandons his experiment. To understand his responsibility, we need to understand what Victor represents in the novel. According to Oates' Frankenstein's Fallen Angel, Frankenstein is a demonic parody or extension of Milton's God, the creator of mankind, but at the same time, by his own account, he is totally unable to control the behavior of his demon. This quote explains Victor's tragic flaw, that he's an irresponsible creator who didn't consider what impact his creature would have on the world. This explains why he views the monster as beautiful before the realization as he views it only as a scientific accomplishment. Victor states, "Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room," followed by this quote that says, "Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that have been my food and pleasant rest for so long, a space were now become hell to me." Victor fails to fulfill his role as a creator by lacking creative responsibility, shown through his perceptions on ethics of creation and regarding responsibility. Victor's ethics of creation is solely dedicated to scientific advancement and personal accomplishments, done without considering the creative responsibility. Victor states, "A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would own their being to me." It proves that he only wants to exercise his authorship over the monster, which means that he lacks the fundamental quality of creation, care and compassion. Oedipus's responsible creativity and modernity in Mary Shelley's Prometheus explains that Frankenstein fails to exercise moral responsibility for the single life he creates because he regards creativity as an abstraction. Oedipus explains that Victor views creation as an intellectual and scientific pursuit, whereas creation must be a morally and ethically motivated act done out of willingness. Thus, this showcases that his objective of creation is corrupt, proving why Frankenstein lacked emotional connections to this creation. The author compares Prometheus from Greek mythology, the god who stole fire from Olympus to grant it to humans, to Frankenstein to emphasize Victor's misinterpretation of creative responsibility. The article states, "Prometheus dares to pity and abandon creation at great personal cost, which emphasizes the fact that the responsibilities of a creator for his progeny cannot be conceived of as a debt to be paid, or an obligation, or duty to be fulfilled. To do so is to misunderstand the creative act in a potentially disastrous manner." Victor's distorted ethics of creation also spotlight his lack of pity and failure to consider individual circumstances. Moral conflicts between Frankenstein and the monster due to absence of pity, compassion, and sympathy of Frankenstein, and the monster's intended and unintended crimes create a dilemma. That pure, objective, or rigid justice cannot be applied, as neither of them can adequately, i.e., sympathetically, assess the responsibilities of a creator for the life he creates. The monster claims that Victor must take responsibility for it since he's its creator, while Victor fails to find sympathy in the monster's justification due to its history. The monster identifies himself with Adam and fallen angel alternatingly from Milton's Paradise Lost. As he is created by the authoritative god, it has been brutally abandoned. It states, "I am thy creature. I ought to be Adam, but I'm rather the fallen angel. I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous." This showcases the abuses it has encountered and how they played a role in shaping its personality, to show the bitterness of the situation and persuade Victor to cooperate in solving it, which is making a mate of the same species. However, Victor, amongst his fading sympathy towards the monster, grows skeptical towards his duty of restoring his creation's happiness, as he tries to weigh his rights over the monster's happiness. Victor says, "Had I right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations? I had before been moved by the sophisms of the being I'd created. I had been struck senseless by his fiendish threats, but now, for the first time, the wickedness of the promise burst upon me." This complex conflict between Victor and the monster represents that invoking justice can become a means of denying involvement in the problems of others, even in one's progeny. After Frankenstein promises the monster to make it a mate, Frankenstein weighs the monster's self-justification and claims to debate its exercise of his creative power. Oedipus explains, Frankenstein's response, when he cannot sympathize with his creature, is to seek to measure the formal logic of equality and reciprocity by determining whether his own rights outweigh the small portion of happiness he can offer him. This further branches out to the fact that ethics of fairness requires fair use of power and self-sacrifice. Oedipus writes, "The inability of Frankenstein and his monster to arrive at such moral reciprocity suggests that an ethics of fairness often assumes a benevolent exercise of power and a fundamental willingness to forego one's needs in favor of communal compromise." So, under this moral complexity, the moral ideal is not cooperation or interdependence, but rather the fulfillment of an obligation, the repayment of a debt, by giving to others without taking anything for oneself. The creature states, I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, which thou owest me. And this highlights the fact that both characters regard the responsibility of creation as owing and something to be repaid for.
To summarize, the monster shows how individuals can struggle with their identity through loneliness, and it follows the monster's journey through discovering self-worth. Yet through the human characters, Shelley exposes the duality of our nature, our capacity for both compassion and cruelty, and warns that unbridled ambition, like fire, can both serve for good and destroy. Frankenstein explores the creative responsibility by showing Victor's and the monster's experiences, strategies, faults, and viewpoints, showcasing how Victor's lack of creative responsibility annihilates the ethics of creation, ultimately defeating the idea of objective justice while also highlighting Victor's absence of compassion and sympathy.
Since you watched this video, you're now a step closer to better comprehending the topics that we've talked about throughout the video. Now, for your studies or discussion related to this novel, you can show off how much of an expert you are on Frankenstein.